When the waters receded, the land emerged, bare, cold, and still, as if every cry, every footprint, every bell of a bygone civilization had been washed away without a trace. Atop a mountain stood a massive wooden vessel, not as a monument of glory, but as the coffin of an old world. And from its open door, a man stepped down. There was no thunder from the heavens, no angels to greet him, only the cold stones beneath his feet and a void of silence in the air. That man, Noah, is a name known across all religious traditions. But have we ever truly understood why he was the only one chosen? Scripture tells us that Noah was a righteous man in his generation. But what does it mean to be righteous? Does it mean not lying, not murdering, not committing adultery? If that were all, then would God's justice go so far as to wipe out the entire world just to preserve one man who was simply not bad? Or was there something deeper, a sacred rhythm that only Noah still kept, while the rest of humanity had lost it? We often read Genesis with modern eyes, as though the people of that time lived by the same moral framework we do. But Noah was not just a good man among bad ones. He lived in an era when even astronomy, rituals, and the seasons of sacrifice had been corrupted by the fallen angels. An age when humanity no longer knew what day was holy, what time was appointed for clean offerings. A world that had lost the harmony between earth and heaven. And in the midst of that chaos, there was only one who still kept the rhythm of the covenant, the rhythm of the appointed feasts, the rhythm of sacred time established from Eden, carried through Abel, through Enoch. Noah wasn't merely avoiding sin, he was keeping the times. And if the covenant is a symphony, then he was the last note still in tune. Genesis doesn't tell the whole story, but there is a text once given to Moses when he was on Mount Sinai, written down by angels at God's command, so that all appointed times may be remembered in their seasons. That book isn't in the Bible, you know. It isn't read in most churches, but it preserves what other scriptures dared not say plainly. Noah was saved, not because he was devout, but because he lived in rhythm with the sacred. That book's name is Jubilees. And if you are still willing to listen, it will lead you to a truth the mainstream Bible has long kept silent. Not many know this, but the Book of Jubilees was once held sacred in ancient Jewish tradition, especially among the Qumran community, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were kept as holy treasure. Its title, The Little Genesis, was not because it was small, but because it told the same beginning story as Genesis from a deeper, older, more precise perspective, structured by a different rhythm altogether. The rhythm of the Jubilees, the 49-year cycles. Each Jubilee was not merely a span of time, but a milestone of the covenant, a point where heaven and earth meet, a moment where divine will is stamped into history. Jubilees doesn't just recount events like other texts, it reshapes time itself. It doesn't merely say Noah was saved. It tells exactly why, at what moment, in which week, according to which cycle. Every event, from the creation of Adam to the ascension of Enoch to the fall of the Watchers, is anchored on a sacred timeline, never drifting. This is no coincidence. It is the calendar of heaven. And the Book of Jubilees is the only remaining map that preserves that divine calendar. But it is precisely for this reason, that the book was excluded from the Standard Bible. Because it does more than recount, it calls back a lost order. It doesn't just say humanity fell because of sin, but declares humanity was destroyed for living out of sync, for failing to keep the appointed times, for not knowing what was the true Sabbath, for offering the wrong kind of sacrifice, on the wrong day, in the wrong season, loving the wrong people, and marrying at the wrong time. The entire rhythm of life had collapsed, and that collapse was not just a moral failure, but a total breakdown of connection between man and God. That is why this book was deemed dangerous. Dangerous not because it was false, but because it was too true. True enough to expose the silence in the scriptures we kept. True enough to make us ask, if Jubilees is real, then how much of what we're doing today is out of rhythm? And now, if you are still here, still listening, then perhaps you are one of the few who still long to rediscover it. This journey is not a sermon, not a theological argument. It is a call to return to a rhythm that once echoed from Eden, was kept by Abel, was seen by Enoch, and was restored by Noah. A rhythm not measured by clocks, but by reverence. A rhythm that, if even one still walks in it, the covenant is not lost. And if you can still hear that call, then perhaps you are the one being awakened. When the floodwaters receded, the ground remained soft, grey, and covered with the traces of a fierce cleansing. On the summit of Mount Ararat, the massive wooden ark stood, silent, towering like a final punctuation mark upon an entire civilization. The wind swept through the mountain passes, no longer carrying the whispers of humankind, only the heavy breath of the earth, of the sky, and of a man. Noah, the last man to emerge from the old world, carried with him no ambitions to rebuild an empire, no urgency to redraw borders, no haste to seek resources or a means of survival. The very first thing he did was bow down, quietly pick up stones, stack them together, and build an altar. No tents, no kitchen, no agricultural plans, only an altar where he offered clean sacrifices. Yet the wonder did not lie in the form, but in the flawless precision. The right species, the exact number, the proper method, on the divinely appointed day. There was no trace of improvisation, no hint of fear, no hidden motive of seeking protection. Everything was done as if he were following a melody long composed. Only now the choir was gone, and he alone remembered the tune. According to the Book of Jubilees, this act was not a religious invention, but a return. Noah did not invent the ritual, he restored it. A sacred memory had been passed down quietly and faithfully from the time of Adam, from the footsteps of Abel at the first altar, from Enoch, who was taken up to heaven after walking in a way that pleased the Lord. Noah did not learn these things from scrolls. He lived within a memory now forgotten by the world, the memory of a sacred schedule. And though he had no paper calendar, no clock, and no one to remind him, he still knew this was the appointed day. This was the hour of offering. This was the moment to renew the covenant, not through words, but through action. What is truly terrifying is not that the world was destroyed, but that only one man still knew how to live rightly after the apocalypse. And what is most admirable is that he did not delay. while the earth was still wet, the sky still dim, and death surrounded him, his first act was to reconnect with God, not through lament, but through an altar, not in panic, but through a timely ritual, not out of a desire to survive, but out of the need to restore a sacred rhythm of life. Because Noah understood, if time is no longer sacred, then nothing is. And if the covenant is not renewed at the appointed time, then life is nothing more than an extended death, a heartbeat with no meaning. The Book of Jubilees does not merely describe Noah as a survivor, but as a recorder. After the waters subsided, he did not rest in the glory of survival, nor did he rush to draft plans for farms or cities. The first thing he did after offering his sacrifice according to Jubilees was to record the cycles, to re-establish the holy calendar, and to mark the days of sacrifices and Sabbaths for the generations to come. This was not an act of personal sentiment or memory. This was the foundation of a new covenant, not invented from nothing, but continuing a rhythm that had existed from the very beginning. Imagine a symphony interrupted by the chaos of the watchers, by the distortion sown by the Nephilim. And then, after the flood, that symphony was played again, every note and measure exact. Noah did not invent the calendar, he restored it. He did not create the rituals, he revived what had once been. Because the rhythm of the covenant never truly disappeared. It was only forgotten by the masses. What astonishes us is that the angels did not come to give Noah a prophecy or a miracle. They came to remind him of the sacred law, not the law of Moses, for Moses had not yet been born, but the original law, the one breathed out from Eden, expressed in Abel's blood at the altar, preserved by Enoch as a whisper between heaven and earth. Raphael, Uriel, Michael, they were not messengers of abstract ideas, but guardians of sacred time. They did not pass on knowledge, they handed down the calendar. For if one does not live according to the appointed times, one cannot offer the right sacrifice. And if the offering is not given rightly, the covenant cannot live again. Noah understood this, and he lived by it. No one reminded him which day was Sabbath. There was no manuscript from Eden to confirm the festivals, but Noah, somehow, still kept the rhythm. He chose the correct animals. He counted the days precisely. He offered his sacrifice on the holy day. He did more than reconnect with God. He reset the axis of time. It was because of this act that the world could begin again, not from rubble, but from a spiritual cycle, not from conquest, but from a right rhythm of life. The covenant needed no fireworks, no proclamations, just one person offering a sacrifice on the right day, as if the calendar had never been broken. And if that was true for Noah, what might await the one who keeps the rhythm today? In the common view of many believers, the covenant between God and mankind is often seen as beginning at Mount Sinai, when Moses alone ascended the sacred mountain and received the tablets from God's own hand. That moment is widely regarded as the birth of the holy law, the beginning of moral, ritual, and communal order for Israel. But if you turn to the forgotten pages of the Book of Jubilees, a quiet truth emerges, that covenant had already been restored, much earlier, not from Sinai, but from the damp earth after the great flood, from one man who stepped out of the ark and built an altar in the silence of recreation. The Book of Jubilees does not view the covenant as a vague promise. It is a living system, a concrete structure made of laws, appointed times, sacrificial rituals, and sacred cycles. The covenant does not drift on emotion. It is engraved in time, and the first to re-establish that sequence of sacred life after the chaos was none other than Noah. He was not only a patriarch by blood, but a keeper of the calendar, a weaver of order. In his hands, time was no longer a formless flow, but each moment anchored to the will of heaven. Imagine it, a world where no one is left alive, no cities, no voices. And in that world, one man steps out, not crying, not seeking power, but quietly offering a timely sacrifice, keeping Sabbath on the right day, distinguishing pure offerings as if no interruption had ever occurred. This was not an act of private piety. It was the act of a soul who still remembered heaven's calendar, and from that act the covenant was restored. No stone tablets, no thunder, just one man living in rhythm, and history began again. Without Noah, not only would mankind have perished, the sacred order between heaven and earth would have been lost as well. God did not preserve him merely to continue the species, but to preserve a soul who still knew the sacred hour. A man who understood that not every day is ordinary. Not every time is a beginning. Only the right time, the right offering, the right rhythm can truly restore the covenant. And from the mud still damp with floodwater, a sacred rhythm sounded again, not from Sinai, but from the heart of one who still kept the forgotten cycle. Before the flood submerged all of humanity, sin did not begin with daggers, lies, or murder. It began quietly, with an offbeat rhythm, a dissonance no one noticed until even the heavens had to cry out. According to the Book of Jubilees, the root cause of the fall was not just moral corruption, it was that mankind had lived out of rhythm, a rhythm established from Eden, through Sabbaths, through cycles of sacrifice, through seasons of celebration, was shattered not by humans, but by angels. The Watchers, angels appointed to observe and preserve sacred order, abandoned their place. They did not simply sin by taking human women. They did something more dangerous. They delivered knowledge before its appointed time. They taught astronomy, but not according to the holy cycles. They taught sacrifice, but not by the correct rites. They instructed in metallurgy, cosmetics, enchantments, warfare, seduction, but none of it led to God. Everything they imparted was off-cycle, off-season, off-balance, and the result was the sacred calendar was thrown into chaos. Imagine the Sabbath no longer observed, the festivals arriving too early or too late, sacrifices offered in the wrong season, of the wrong kind, with the wrong heart. People still performed rituals, but as if speaking a language that had been twisted. No one remembered exactly when the holy days were. No one knew how many years made up a jubilee. No one could tell the moment of offering from the moment of rest. And when time was obscured, even the sacred became a mute voice. The Book of Jubilees makes it clear. Moral decay was not the sole reason for the flood. That was the result, not the root. The deeper cause was the complete disconnection between heaven's sacred cycles and mankind's way of life. Blood began to be shed, not from the altar, but from violence. Offerings were no longer made, only empty performances remained. The sacred seasons became random days. No one remembered why to rest, why to fast, why to observe. And so the covenant was forgotten, not in will, but in the calendar. Once no one knows the right time, no one can hold on to the sacred. And when the sacred falls silent, heaven must speak, not in words, but in water. A flood large enough to wash away every wrong calendar, every offbeat rhythm, every soulless celebration, until it could all begin again with one man who still kept the appointed time. The Watchers did not spread blasphemy, they merely altered time. They did not destroy the altar, they led people to offer sacrifices on the wrong day. They did not block worship, they displaced it from its appointed hour. And for that reason, according to Jubilees, everything unraveled from the root. They taught astronomy, but not the 364-day cycle that God ordained from the beginning. They taught stargazing, lunar cycles, seasonal changes, but all of it veered from the sacred calendar. A year no longer ended at its true close. A week no longer held its day of rest. A season no longer bore its sanctity. Even worse, they did not teach open disrespect. They taught rituals, but skipped the emphasis on purity. They taught sacrifice, but omitted the posture of the heart. They taught how to light fire, but forgot the sacred days of rest. And in that absence, humanity still held festivals, still sang songs, still lit lamps, still gave offerings, as if everything were right. But in truth, everything had drifted out of sync with the covenant. Their sin was not rebellion, but the illusion of grace, while the axis of sacred time had already been lost. Jubilees clearly states, the Watchers did not create a new religion. They distorted the old faith. They did not change the symbols. They merely shifted the timing. And that alone was enough to render an entire system of worship powerless. Because when you offer sacrifices on a day not appointed, observe the Sabbath on the wrong cycle, follow the correct rituals but at the wrong time, those actions no longer reach heaven. Heaven does not respond to the misaligned call. God does not accept offerings made out of season. The covenant, which is meant to be a steady, rhythmic, sacred flow between heaven and mankind, is broken. We often think the greatest wrong is to commit evil, but according to Jubilees, the gravest deviation is doing something sacred on an unsacred day. And that is exactly what happened. A world still offering sacrifices, but no longer knowing when the appointed times were. Still resting, but not on the correct Sabbath. Still believing they were living rightly, while the covenant had already fallen silent. Because of this dislocation, God did not merely punish the world with a flood. He re-established completely the entire sacred rhythm of life, not with thunder, but with a man, Noah, a man who still knew the right day, the right season, the right time. And from that, the covenant began to breathe again, gently, but enough to restore a sacred calendar that had been bent out of shape. Do not think of the great flood as an outburst of divine anger. Jubilees does not describe it as a rash act of fury, but as a sacred ritual, a cosmic cleansing, a purification not only of blood and bodies, but of calendars and souls. When blood is spilled without order, when holy days are distorted, when people rest on unsanctified days and offer sacrifices outside their appointed times, the lifeline of the covenant between heaven and earth is severed. No rhythm of life remains in harmony with divine will. The earth, which was once a meeting place between soul and the heavenly realm, had become a wasteland of corrupted knowledge and unleashed desire, of ritual form and arrogant human self-will. Such a world did not need another sermon. It was no longer fit for partial repairs. It needed to be restarted from the foundation. And water, in biblical theology, is not just a tool for destruction. It is a symbol of restored order. It does not merely erase individual sin. It wipes out a distorted system. It swept away cities. But more importantly, it swept away false festivals, broken sacrifices, warped cycles. Everything out of sync with the sacred calendar was dissolved in the waters of purification. And in the midst of that complete silence, only one man was spared. Not because he was more moral than all, not because he was strong or wise, but because he still lived in rhythm. Noah, the man who kept the rest when no one else remembered which day was Sabbath. The man who chose the right clean animals, the exact number at the proper time. The man who had no paper calendar in his mind, but a calendar written by faith. A calendar not counting hours by the sun, but measuring time through reverent fear. Noah was not chosen because he taught others how to live. He was chosen because he lived rightly when no one else did, and that alone was enough for the covenant to endure. In a world whose rhythm had collapsed, only one who kept the right beat could start everything anew. And water, in its deepest meaning, washed away sacred pretense until only silent obedience remained. Not to punish, but to re-establish the sacred. Not to destroy, but to find the one who still kept the calendar. And that man was Noah. In many popular videos and books, Enoch is often exalted as the exceptional figure, the one taken into heaven, the one who entered the heavenly realms, the one who received deep revelations about the Watchers and the future of humanity. But if you open the Book of Jubilees, another truth quietly appears. There was another man, less mentioned, yet he held the pivot of history after the great flood. That man was Noah, not Enoch, but Noah was the one who restored the sacred calendar, who preserved the cycle of the covenant. When the Watchers were judged and the corrupted knowledge they introduced had thrown the holy calendar into chaos, God sent the angels, not only to pronounce judgment, but to teach again. Noah was not given a grand mission, nor did he receive dazzling visions. He was taught things that might seem mundane, but were profoundly sacred. He was shown how to distinguish clean animals, not just for food, but for sacrifice. He was given the 364-day calendar, the only one that could keep Sabbaths, high feasts, and sacrificial cycles in line with divine will. In his hands, time was not just a tool, but the living form of the covenant. For if sacrifices are offered on the right day, heaven listens. If rest is kept on the right cycle, the soul finds peace. But if the timing is wrong, even the sacred becomes empty. Enoch brought prophecy, yes, but Noah brought back the sacred cycle. Without Enoch, we would not understand how the watchers fell. But without Noah, no one would know when the holy days are, when to sacrifice, when to rest. Without Noah, Shem would not know how to preserve sacred time. Without Shem, there would be no Eber, no Abraham. And if Abraham had not known how to keep the cycles of sacrifice, he could not have passed down the appointed feasts, the sabbatical years, the Jubilee cycles to Israel. Without a sacred calendar, there is no sacred people. Without rhythm, there is no identity. So when we only remember Enoch and forget Noah, we forget the one who re-established order, the one who restored, not through speech, but through actions on the right day, in the right way, at the right time. A man who lived the covenant, not through words, but through sacred rhythm. And that man, according to Jubilees, became the foundation for all sacred history that followed, not because he saw heaven, but because he preserved time. When you think of a calendar, you might picture numbers lined up on a page, months and days, phone reminders, or a work schedule. But in Scripture, especially in the Book of Jubilees, a calendar is not merely a timekeeping tool. It is a sacred order, a way of life, a rhythm of the soul walking with God. That calendar was not created to control, but to connect. Not for tracking time, but for keeping the covenant. Jubilees makes it clear. The sacred year has 364 days, divided into 52 weeks, each with exactly 7 days. No extra days, no disruptions. Every year begins on a fixed day, so that holy feasts never shift, and the Sabbath never falls out of cycle. This is not a bureaucratic detail, it is theological bedrock. Because if rest days shift, if festivals land in the wrong season, if sacrifices are offered on unappointed days, then the connection with heaven is severed. The sacred calendar is God's time compass for humanity, so every moment can echo the presence of the divine. Imagine a year where each season is not just climate, but a message from heaven. Every week holds a day of rest, not just for the body, but to listen. Every sacrificial cycle is not just a ritual, but a scheduled conversation between heaven and earth. Every right-timed act is an act of covenant keeping. Every Sabbath kept properly is a declaration. We still remember. And as long as that sacred calendar is kept, the rhythm of holy life never dies. But then the watchers came. They brought a different calendar, also with days, weeks, and seasons, but out of sync. They did not destroy the rituals, they shifted the axis. And the most painful part is, people didn't notice. They still offered sacrifices, still celebrated, still performed rituals. But it was all like a theater play performed on the wrong date, while the audience had already gone. God did not abandon them, but they missed the appointment. The calendar they kept no longer resonated with heaven. They were not wrong in their motives, but wrong in rhythm, wrong from the breath. A calendar not measured by clocks, but by the soul. A calendar not aiming for efficiency, but sanctity. A calendar not to make man live faster, but to help him live rightly. And that is the calendar Noah kept, not on paper, but in a memory passed down, through a heart that could still hear the whisper of God in time. If that calendar is revived, the covenant will breathe again, but if it is forgotten, we may still live, but we will be out of sync with heaven. Jubilees makes this plain. If people do not know the holy day, do not keep the appointed seasons, do not remember the sacred weeks, then even if they perform every ritual correctly with full sincerity, it still does not connect with the heavenly realm. It's like a letter written with love, full of reverent words, but sent to the wrong address. It is not rejected, it just never arrives. And the danger is, the sender never knows. They believe they're speaking to heaven, while heaven has been waiting on a different day, in a different season, at a different hour. Noah understood this, and that is why, the moment he stepped off the ark, he did not begin with building a home, planting crops, or planning survival. He began by restoring the calendar. Not an agricultural one, but a sacred one. Not to manage time, but to reset the rhythm of life. He divided the weeks, recorded the sacrificial cycles, re-established the Sabbath days, and marked the feasts that reconnect heaven and earth. Every note in that calendar was not a number, but a call from the covenant. Noah was not a manager of time. He was the high priest of history, the keeper of the cosmic rhythm. Jubilees emphasizes, when time goes out of sync, everything goes with it. The sacrifices fall out of alignment. The prayers fall out of alignment. The divine presence is misaligned. And when the covenant is displaced from its appointed cycle, what once was sanctifying becomes ineffective. Humanity is no longer the chosen creation, but merely creatures performing rituals in silence. The promise is not revoked, but they are standing in the wrong place at the wrong time, speaking into an empty space where no one is left to listen. Noah, according to Jubilees, was not merely a survivor. He was the reset point of the covenant, not through a dramatic vision, but through one quiet act, offering a sacrifice on the correct day, keeping the Sabbath on the right cycle, recording the calendar in the true rhythm. And from that act, heaven listened again. The covenant responded. The rhythm aligned. No more angels were needed. No more miracles required. Just one man who still knew which day was holy. And the world, though freshly cleansed, could begin again, not from the beginning, but from the right rhythm. We often exalt Enoch, for he was the one taken up into heaven, the one who saw the heavenly realms, who conversed with angels and recorded the hidden mysteries of the cosmos. The prophecies of Enoch echo like a call from the heights above. But the Book of Jubilees tells us something else. While the world was swept away, it was Noah, not Enoch, who still kept the rhythm in alignment with the covenant. Enoch was the vision, but Noah was the reality. Enoch was the revelation, but Noah was the action. Enoch was the voice from above, but Noah, the silent faithfulness rooted in the earth. And that matters more than we realize, for the world does not lack visions, but the world always lacks those who keep the appointed times. We do not need more revelations if no one lives in the right cycle. We do not need more angels if every altar is built on the wrong day. We do not need more books if no one remembers when to rest, when to offer, when to listen. The covenant does not only live on stone tablets, it breathes in the rhythm of each cycle. And if that rhythm breaks, even heaven falls silent. Noah did not ascend to heaven like Enoch, but he did something even harder. He bridged heaven and earth by living in the right rhythm. When he preserved the sacred calendar, he did not merely live righteously. He reopened the connection between the newly cleansed earth and the heavens, awaiting a reply. Each Sabbath kept on its appointed day was a gateway reopened. Each offering given at its appointed time, an echo still resonating through generations. No dazzling light was needed, only one person who did not forget the sacred hour. Enoch saw great things to awaken hearts, but Noah lived each sacred hour rightly, to hold the rhythm, and that rhythm was what allowed the covenant to be restored, not through a vision, but through a man who stood on earth, yet remembered heaven's rhythm. And because he remembered, the sacred calendar lived again. Because he kept it, the covenant was not erased. And because he lived in rhythm, humanity could begin again, right from the place where it had fallen out of sync. We often assume Noah was saved because he was righteous, because he avoided sin, kept a pure heart, and refrained from the wickedness of the world. That's the common understanding, righteousness as personal morality. But the Book of Jubilees makes a more startling claim. Noah was saved not merely because he was good, but because he lived in right time. He kept the rhythm. While the world drowned in chaos, he lived according to the cycle established from the beginning. Noah lived by the sacred calendar, the 364-day system ordained by God through the angels. He knew what day was Sabbath. He knew when to offer sacrifices. He could distinguish the sacred seasons from the common. He did not live by instinct, but by sacred cadence. Every act, from sacrifice to Sabbath to the recording of feast cycles, was a response to the covenant. No need for more words, no need for signs and wonders. Just one person who still knew what day it was, according to heaven. And Noah kept that, not by memory, but by faithfulness. Righteousness, according to Jubilees, is not an abstract moral state. It is a concrete way of living, with rhythm, with cycle, with consistency. That righteousness is not found in intention, but in how Noah lived the sacred hours rightly. If a sacrifice is offered on the wrong day, no matter how sincere, it does not reach heaven. If the Sabbath is forgotten, the gate connecting heaven and man is closed. At that moment, it is not God who withdraws, but mankind who has stepped out of appointment. Noah, according to Jubilees, was not merely moral. He was the one who still kept time correctly. That's why, when heaven needed a point of restoration, a person to reset the cycle of the covenant after all had been swept away, it was Noah who was chosen. Not because he was stronger, not because he knew more, but because he lived in rhythm. And rhythm is what keeps the covenant alive. Rhythm is what makes prayer heard. Rhythm is what causes God to call out to one person to begin again. The Book of Jubilees tells us, after the great flood receded, after the old world was washed away by sacred waters, God did not send angels to perform miracles, to punish, or to declare visions, but to do something seemingly small yet decisive, to teach the calendar again. God sent 3 angels, Michael, Raphael, and Uriel, to meet Noah, not to display supernatural power, but to restore a rhythm that had been lost. Not to instill fear, but to guide a new beginning on sacred time. Michael, the angel who fights for holiness, taught Noah how to distinguish which animals were clean and which could not be used for offerings. Raphael, the angel of healing, taught him the proper way to sacrifice, so that offerings would no longer be mere formality, but reconnection. Uriel, the angel of light, re-established the feast days, restored the Sabbath, and instructed Noah to record the cycles in the 364-day calendar, not to manage time, but to restore it. Not to make Noah's life easier, but to help him live more rightly. This does not appear in the Book of Enoch. For though Enoch saw the heavens and was led through corridors of light by angels, he left behind no living system for earth. He was a reminder from above, but Noah brought the sacred breath back to the ground. That rhythm did not reside in a dazzling vision, but in keeping the right days, right offerings, and right cycles. The angels did not come to astonish him, but to align each step with the sacred calendar once given to the ancestors. There are no victories told, no glories described. Only quiet instructions, a man rewriting the week, a man remembering the festivals, a man recording the sacrificial moments. And from there, a new world is rebuilt not on strength, but on exact rhythm. The angels did not need to grant him power, so long as he remembered how to live in proper time. And Noah was faithful enough, silent enough, steady enough to learn that rhythm from the angels in a world freshly cleansed, not by sword, but by calendar, not by miracles, but by right time. This may surprise you, but Jubilees does not hesitate to declare, not all offerings are accepted, not every sacrifice is recorded, not every sincere gesture is enough. If the offering is unclean, it is not holy. If the sacrifice is made out of season, the ritual is nullified. If the cycle is broken, even a heartfelt act becomes silence. In the universe of Jubilees, everything moves by rhythm, and if something is done at the wrong time, the offering, no matter how precious, becomes lost sound. Noah was not just someone who knew how to offer, he was someone who knew when to offer. That's why he did not sacrifice by feeling, not by intuition, not by habit. He offered on the appointed day. He chose the correct animal. He kept the exact number. And more importantly, he did not treat it as a private ritual. He recorded it. He scheduled it. He wrote out the cycle, and he passed it on. Not merely as tradition, but as the core of spiritual life, like a symphony where every note must be struck at the right beat and moment to ring true. A song, no matter how beautiful, if played off time, becomes chaos. A prayer, no matter how earnest, if uttered on the wrong sacred day, is only an echo into emptiness. Noah understood this, and that is why he was saved, not just as a survivor, but as the one chosen to realign the covenant's axis. He became the first, after the great cleansing, to live rightly between heaven and earth. And he didn't stop there. He taught his sons, passed it on to Shem, carved into memory each Sabbath, each festival cycle, each appointed time. This was the restoration of the covenant, not by declaration, but by a sacred lifestyle. He didn't just keep rhythm for himself. He reset the melody for the entire lineage of mankind. For the covenant, if not lived on the right day, in the right way, at the right time, is a promise forever delayed. But when Noah lived in that rhythm, the world could begin again, not from a ritual, but from a sacred calendar. If the covenant is the sacred relationship between God and humanity, then the calendar is the clock of that relationship. God does nothing by accident. No sacred event in biblical history happened randomly, from the Great Flood to Abraham's covenant to the Exodus from Egypt. Each aligned perfectly with the cycles ordained in the sacred calendar. Every 49 years, a jubilee; every 7 years, a sabbatical; every week, a day of rest. Nothing was off by a single beat, because in Scripture, time does not flow, it turns in cycles. The Book of Jubilees is not a storybook. It is the map of sacred cycles, a map of time, a blueprint of how the covenant functions. And Noah, the one who lived through divine cleansing, was the first to be entrusted with resetting that clock. He did not just look to the heavens, he counted the days. He did not merely offer, he offered in season. He did not just believe, he lived in rhythm. And because he restored the calendar, the order between heaven and earth could turn again. This overturns our common understanding of righteousness. We think righteousness means avoiding wrong, personal morality, a clean conscience. But in Jubilees, righteousness is living in rhythm, keeping appointed times, remembering sacred days, offering in season, worshipping in the right cycle. And without someone to preserve that rhythm, the covenant cannot be re-established. A promise missed is a promise delayed, but a promise fulfilled in time becomes sacred reality. Noah was not a philosopher, not a visionary like Enoch, not a ruler like Moses, but he had something no one else kept: sacred time. And that made him the new beginning. If no one keeps the clock, the covenant misses the train of redemption. But because Noah kept it, the rhythm returned, and we, who live after, do not only need morality, but punctuality. Not only faith, but the awareness of when to live it, because the sacred clock is still ticking, and only those who can hear it will keep the rhythm. Eden was not only the place of the tree of life or the forbidden knowledge of good and evil, it was the first realm governed by a flawless rhythm. Adam was taught the day of rest. Abel knew exactly which offering to bring. Enoch journeyed through the heavens not by body, but by understanding the heavenly weeks. But then the watchers came, those angels sent to guard, instead chose to break. They did not destroy the sacred rhythm with violence, but by deviation. They did not shatter the covenant through destruction, but by shifting everything, just enough to lose the entire cycle. And then only one man remained, a man without visions, without miracles, who did not ascend to heaven, who did not see the heavenly realms, but who still kept time. Noah did not rebuild Eden with his hands, but he restored Eden's rhythm with his life. He did not quench the fire of the fall, but kept alive the ember of an era that once moved in harmony. And through him, once again, the earth could reconnect with heaven, not through thunder, but through one rightly kept Sabbath. Not by the blood of a new ritual, but by the blood of offerings in their appointed time. That is why Noah became the crucial link, a sacred bridge between two shores, Eden lost and Israel yet to come. He stood where nothing remained, but held on to everything. And he did not keep it for himself, but to pass it on. Shem received, not only bloodline, but calendar. Eber preserved not just the Hebrew name, but the cycle. Then came Abraham, a man who didn't need to climb a mountain to find a God, but who was counted righteous simply by living in the rhythm that had been established. The covenant does not endure through those who see much, but through those who keep faithfully, not through great prophets, but through those who do the smallest things rightly. And the smallest, yet holiest thing is this: living in rhythm. Every person, every generation only needs to continue that rhythm, and they are carrying the covenant forward. No visions needed, no angels appearing. Just live in rhythm, because that rhythm is heaven's clock. And you, if you can still hear it, are the next keeper. After Noah, the one who preserved the sacred calendar was not a nation, not a religion, not an empire. The keeper of the calendar was a son, a man who stood in the shadow of his father, but quietly walked forward through the noise of a world just rebuilt. His name was Shem, not a hero, not a prophet, just a man who knew how to keep the rhythm, and because of that, he was chosen to carry the covenant forward. The Book of Jubilees tells us, while the world gathered to build Babel, a tower to make a name for themselves, Shem did not join. He did not follow the crowd. He did not chase after new knowledge or ambitious declarations. While the nations measured the height of their tower, he measured the time between Sabbaths. While people counted floors to heaven, he counted cycles of sacrifice, because he knew nothing reaches higher than the connection between heaven and man. And if that rhythm is lost, then everything built is just scattered bricks. Shem needed no tall tower, because he kept the cycle that hovered between earth and heaven. He needed no fame, because he preserved a rhythm that, if broken, would cause all of history to drift off course. He lived in a chaotic world, yet he still knew when to rest, when to sacrifice. These things seemed small, but they were the silent bloodstream flowing through every generation, keeping the covenant from being severed. From Shem, the sacred calendar was passed to Eber, and from Eber to Abraham. But it was not passed through conquests, nor through noble bloodlines. It passed through those who lived quietly, but on time. Through those who needed no trumpet blast, but knew when to stop on the appointed day. Through those like Shem, who chose obedience in silence instead of conquest through noise. And the wonder is this: the mainstream Bible says little about Shem, but that makes him all the more significant. He did not need to be famous, he only needed to be faithful. And because of him, the calendar did not break. The rhythm was not lost. The covenant did not fade. Because not only those who do great things are written into sacred history, but those who do the right thing at the right time. And Shem kept it. We often admire Abraham because his faith was counted as righteousness. In many sermons, he's seen as a model of obedience, of unconditional trust, of a man who left his homeland for a land he had never seen. But the Book of Jubilees reveals another depth, no less powerful. Abraham did not only believe, he kept the calendar. Not a calendar of a nation, but the calendar of God. Not a system given through Moses, but a rhythm passed down from Eden, through Noah, through Shem, through Eber. Jubilees states clearly, Abraham knew the difference between clean and unclean animals. He made sacrifices on the appointed days. He kept the Sabbath, not by cultural tradition, but by a sacred memory passed down from his ancestors. Before the law was etched in stone, he lived it by his actions. Before a chosen people existed, he lived as one who was chosen. He aligned his life with the sacred feasts. He had no temple, no central altar, no codified law, but in his heart the rhythm still echoed. This was not modern morality. It was a deeper rhythm, a living memory of Eden still pulsing in his blood, a whisper never erased, a faint echo in a world that had forgotten, but which he could still hear. And because he lived in rhythm, he was chosen. Not because he was the wisest, the holiest, the most powerful, but because he was the only one still carrying the covenant's clock within his heart. Through him, that calendar continued. Isaac did not merely inherit land, he inherited the calendar. Jacob was not only the father of 12 tribes, he was the keeper of the cycle. And from Israel, a people was born, not from abstract belief, but from a way of life with weeks, months, feasts, rests, all anchored to an unchanging sacred rhythm. Abraham did not only have faith, he heard the breath of heaven in the schedule of earth. And that's why he became the invisible backbone of a covenant that would later be formally established, not at Sinai, but in a man living the appointed rhythm while the world no longer remembered the day. Through the generations, as empires rose and fell, as Israel's children were exiled to Babylon, as religious and political reforms shook worship to its core, something quiet but tragic happened. The sacred calendar, the calendar of the covenant, began to fade from memory, not because it was wrong, but because it was too right, too sacred, too aligned with a God who could not be controlled, and what cannot be controlled is often discarded. The Book of Jubilees, the only text preserving the calendar from Eden to Israel, was excluded from the canonical Bible, not because it was mythical, but because it declared the sacred calendar did not begin with Judaism, but with Eden. The law did not originate only at Sinai, but with Noah. The covenant does not require a temple, but the correct rhythm. That is what made the religious powers uneasy. They could not manipulate a calendar that does not change. They could not control a system not centered around them. So they broke the rhythm. Feasts were altered. The calendar was shifted to the moon, even though Jubilees warned that such shifts came from the watchers. The Sabbath was moved, the week shortened, holy days pushed out of their original cycle, and those who still kept the original calendar were labeled outdated, excluded, even persecuted. Eventually, a generation grew up that no longer knew heaven had a clock, no longer asked, which feast is true, which Sabbath is right. They simply followed the rhythms of work, of markets, of modern churches, but not the rhythm of the covenant, and the world gradually forgot it once lived by time measured in divine will. Today we know GMT, UTC, atomic clocks, time zones, but we no longer know the year of Jubilee. We no longer ask which Sabbath is true. We no longer stop to hear heaven's clock ticking until now. If you are reading or listening to this story, something miraculous has happened. That calendar, once thought lost, has been stirred awake, not by an institution, not by a prophet, but by you, the one who still has the hunger to ask, am I living in rhythm? And if you can still hear it, then the calendar never stopped. It was only waiting for someone to keep it going. None of us are Noah. We did not step off an ark after a flood. We are not restoring the order of the world. We are not offering the first sacrifice on ground still soaked with judgment. But that does not mean we have no part, because if the covenant truly is a living relationship between God and man, then it does not require us to be prophets. It does not ask us to carry history. It only asks us to keep one part rightly. You may not know every cycle of the 364-day calendar. You may not be able to distinguish each feast, each week, each jubilee. You may not know how to offer sacrifice like the patriarchs, but you can keep one day, one true day of rest. One day untouched by work schedules, undistracted by phones, unclaimed by the noise of the world. One Sabbath, not kept out of law, but out of love. One day when you slow down, because what sustains the covenant is not insight, but attentiveness, not mastery of rituals, but the keeping of rhythm. And sometimes just one rhythm is enough to preserve the connection between heaven and earth. Noah was chosen, not because he was a hero, but because he still remembered the sacred hour, still knew when to offer, still heard the ticking of heaven's clock while the world had drifted off beat. And what about you? If you can still keep one rhythm, one sacred day, one quiet space, one small act, but true, one moment of forgiveness, one moment of stillness, one pause to hear scripture, then maybe you are the one keeping what remains of the covenant. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to change the world. Just keep your part, truly, reverently. And that part, when lived truly, will awaken the rest, because the sacred rhythm doesn't need a loud voice, just one person who won't let it go silent. We often believe that to be chosen by God, one must be a giant, like Moses parting the sea, Elijah calling fire from heaven, Enoch ascending into the clouds. But if you pause and read Jubilees carefully, you will discover a humbling truth. God is not always looking for heroes. He seeks those who still keep time, not those who preach with thunder, not those who perform visions, but those, like Noah, who know when the feast is, who know when to stop, who know how to live the sacred calendar even in a world gone mad. No power required, just rhythm. No full understanding of law, just a refusal to let the sacred day be forgotten. No grand offering, just one act, rightly timed. For the covenant does not require you to become someone else. It only asks you to live rightly the part you were given. And that part may begin with the smallest things. One moment of silence at Friday's sunset, as a reminder that the coming day is not like the rest. One note in your personal calendar that says, "This is Sabbath, and I will not let it pass like a rushed Friday or a busy Saturday." One choice to offer what is clean, not blood like the patriarchs, but a sincere prayer, a quiet forgiveness, a still moment amid the chaos of life. Because that is what the Book of Jubilees reminds us. The covenant does not need greatness. It needs someone on time, and you, though you may do nothing grand, could be the one God is waiting for to bring back a rhythm once heard in Eden through Noah, to Shem, to Abraham, and now to you. If you keep time, then the covenant still lives, and you, not a hero, but the keeper of the fire. Not everyone pauses mid-video. Not everyone has the patience to follow a journey about calendars, let alone a sacred calendar. But if you're still here, still reading these final lines, then perhaps you are someone who still hears, not with the ears, but with the soul. A rhythm delicate as a breeze, recognized only by those who carry the ancient memory within. The covenant, the link between heaven and man, has never been destroyed. It was never broken by war, never erased by history. It was only forgotten, like a melody still echoing in the universe, but waiting for someone living in rhythm to bring it back. And if you still hear this invitation, then perhaps you are the one who has been chosen, not to do something great, but to preserve one part, to live one rhythm, to not let the sacred note die. If you hear it, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, not with arguments, not with doctrines, but with your life, through a simple act, honoring the day of rest, remembering a feast, pausing when the world rushes, forgiving when others retaliate, living lightly when the world is heavy, because that is how the covenant is preserved, not through theory, but through the sacred rhythm of one person in a world off-beat. If today you decide to keep one rhythm, one sacred thing, then perhaps the covenant has just continued. And to mark this journey, leave a comment. One thing you will keep. One action you will live differently. One day you will make holy. One rhythm you won't let slip. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be true. And if you feel this story is not just for you, then share it. Send it to someone you believe can still hear, not to debate, but so they too may have the chance to hear a melody once heard in Eden through Noah to Shem to Abraham, and now through you. Because sometimes one person living rightly is enough for God to begin rewriting history. Amen.